Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Joint Accessibility Committee meeting for November 22nd. Great to see those of you who have been able to join in, and I know several have not been able to due to the difficulty with the road and with power outages, but we do have quorum, which is great. So we'll proceed with the meeting. Um, I see that we've got a few missing faces, but here we've got Councillor Shell, Councillor Ryle, myself, Benin, and Kathy, which I believe does make quorum. We respectfully acknowledge that the County of Haliburton is located on Treaty 20 Mississauga territory and in the traditional territory of the Mississauga and Chippewa nations, collectively known as the Williams Treaties First Nations, which are Curve Island, Curve Lake, Rama, Hiawatha, Alderville, and Scugog Island, Beausoleil, and Georgina Island First Nations. We acknowledge a shared presence of Indigenous nations throughout the area and recognize its original Indigenous inhabitants as the stewards of its lands and waters since time immemorial. Before we go to the adoption of the agenda, I'd like to propose a small amendment under new business. We would like to make note of the recent decision by County Council to reconsider public transportation, and we will get into that in at that point. But if that is acceptable to one and all, if I could have a mover and a seconder for the agenda as amended. Benin and Cease. All in favor to accept the, yep, great. That's carried. Now, are there any disclosures of pecuniary interest today? Seeing none. Has everyone had a chance to look at the minutes from October the 11th, and were there any comments or corrections on that? Seeing none, if I could have a mover and a seconder to accept the minutes. Councillor Shell and Benin. All in favor? That's carried. So we're going to jump straight into new business, unless there are other points. Oh, and I'm sorry, I jumped straight through the welcome and introductions most important part, which is to welcome our brand new CAO, Gary Dyke, to the committee. Gary brings with him a wealth of experience in the municipal sector, and no doubt will have a treasure trove of ideas for us here on the committee as well. Hopefully not all of the ideas will have come with enormous budgets from much larger municipal centers than ours, but we will do our best to take your ideas and run with them to the degree that we can. So welcome, very, very welcome. So let's jump straight down into new business. In your agenda package, you've found the multi-year joint accessibility plan draft for the coming period. I'm just opening up my computer again here. And looking for any insights or thoughts that you might have on it. The red line version I found to be particularly useful so that we can see where things have been altered and things have been added upon. Did anyone have any comments on that or suggestions for alteration? Oh, yes, please.
Hi, everyone. I just wanted to make a few notes as you've been looking through these plans. To make the revisions, I reviewed plans in other municipalities as well as provincial accessibility legislation. And just a note of some of the track changes to help explain, why I made those changes. We didn't really have a title page to the plan. So the first thing that I did was just to create a front page, moving the title to the top of the page, making it more accessible for people using screen readers to know exactly what they're accessing. And also use some stock imagery to add a little bit of color to that front page. I just wanted to thank the Haliburton County Public Library team for providing that center image of an Envoy Connect device. Those are available at our local library branches to help with audiobook reading. On page 2, I added a page noting our newly created accessibility email address, as well as the county's website for people to access more information. We've added a table of contents and also a message from County Council with Warden Danielson's support. Some plans throughout the different municipalities have a joint accessibility committee message. We didn't add that this year, but we did add a note about the work of the committee in the information section. My understanding is that the plan needs to be reviewed annually, so perhaps we could draft a message before next year's review if that's something we wanted to add, unless anybody would like to add it this year. On pages 6 and 7, we added some accomplishments from previous years to capture some of the work done. This is not the full listing of work, but just some highlights from each community, showing the possibilities that could happen and the work that has happened. On page 12, I added a note on transportation, and we did actually have a second draft of that note, just noting that accessible transportation is available to qualifying Dysart residents through the DIMO bus program. And then it's also available throughout the county through private services and community service organizations. We added a note on review and monitoring on page 15. So thanks both to the Director of Corporate Services and the Deputy Clerk for their support and feedback during this process. And yeah, then moving over for any comments, changes, additions, suggestions.
Thanks. Any thoughts at all from? I think it looks really good. I appreciate the changes you've made, certainly. Some things are just that little bit clearer by drawing them out that bit more. My only question, which has now been answered by you, but maybe I'll flip it into a suggestion, is with regards to the things that were accomplished. There's that list on the red line version on page 8, and I think it's page 6 on the regular draft version. You say that you've put a partial list together, but when I think about Algonquin Highlands, the work that we've done in Algonquin Highlands, for example, I can think of a few more things or a couple more things that I think we can have a lot of pride in, take a lot of pride in. And similarly, at county level, I think the fact that, for example, our election process is now online, and yet we still offer electoral support for people who want to come in or want to call in. Like we're really trying to broaden people's access to their right to vote. And I think they should be celebrated. And I wonder what others on the committee think about actually creating as close to an exhaustive list as we can, knowing that I'm sure we're going to forget one or two things that have happened, but to actually try to use this page as a space to report on what we've done. And I'll give you just another example or two from Algonquin Highlands. Hold on. So elsewhere in Algonquin Highlands, oh yes, I'll start at the county. I think I clarified with the deputy clerk. It was since May of this year that our documents have been made accessible on Civic Web, and I think that's a really important thing to note. The fact that we at the county and also at the lower tiers are now opting for continued hybrid Zoom and in-person meetings, and the fact that there are closed captions that are automatically generated on YouTube should you want to watch in. I think that's an evolution for our county. I mean, I know it came about from COVID, but I think it really does help more people have access to what is being said and decided at county. As I say, taking elections online, and then, a couple of tangible things in Algonquin Highlands. and I would look to the other councillors to, to hear if there are any missing from your lists. But when we at Algonquin Highlands improve our public docks and landings, we can confirm with the head of Parks and Rec the degree to which there are regulations that are being followed, or if no regulations exist regarding accessibility in docks and landings. But when I look at the docks and landings that we've been improving, they are more accessible to more people. So I can't speak to the standard if there are any standards, but I know that it is easier for a number of people, including our more aged water-based population, to use those spaces. So there might be a little bit of follow-up there that could augment that. And we also have started with our airport terminal, which is as much a county facility as it is an Algonquin Highlands facility. To create new internal layout designs that are accessible, because right now the terminal building is not accessible. We know that. The bathrooms are downstairs. It's not an inclusive space. So we have created, or are in the process of creating, a new accessible layout so that should a pocket of money open up from a funding source somewhere, we're shovel ready and we can get right in there and say, here's what we want to do to bring it back up to code, so that it's accessible for more people. And I think that mentality of getting shovel-ready designs in place for when we can afford to make those changes, ensuring that there is accessibility built in, is, it's a good news story for Algonquin Highlands. So those are the kinds of things that we might choose to include so that it is a more exhaustive list of what we've done. While recognizing I'm putting you directly on the spot, Cease and Lisa, are there other examples in your townships that you could also cite?
I don't know if I can give exact examples necessarily, but I mean, any new infrastructure that the municipality undertakes, excuse me, we do our very best to make sure that everything is done as it should be for accessibility.
Right. Yeah.
Same with us. Like for instance, we've done some major repairs to entrances and so on and so forth. And yes, there was an improvement in accessibility, but to be honest, they were dangerous to start with. And so you got the combination of, do we take a false credit and give it to accessibility as our motive? Or is it because they had to be repaired, and while they were being repaired, they were made more accessible? So we really haven't nitpicked to that point.
Okay.
And the other thing too is with Hurliki Park, everything we're doing on Hurliki Park at this point is in the preliminary stages, in the sense that it's under construction and things are being done with graders and so on and so forth. But the eye on accessibility is obviously there, but there's no tangible information at this point in time. It's in the pre-planning and pre-final construction. So the eye is on the ball. It's just that we ain't got hold of the ball that much yet.
Yeah, and those sorts of successes will come, I suppose, in this page in the next plan, when we can talk about what you've done then, for sure. So perhaps, and I see Andrea, our head of corporate services.
If I can just add to help maybe with your conversation, for the past projects that were identified on the attached schedule of the old policy, and we would update them as things were completed, or as locals identified new projects, add them to the list. The direction at your last meeting was for us to remove all the completed plans or completed projects from that list, and start with the new ones. So if you're looking for a more extensive list of completed things that we have done, there's the option of leaving the completed ones on the attached spreadsheet if that's what the committee would like, instead of the small summary of what Sue has incorporated in the actual plan itself.
Well, I guess I put that to the committee. I rather enjoyed reading the upfront successes myself, but I leave that question to the committee for sure. Any thoughts?
Because we can go back to that list from the attachment and include the accomplishments within the actual plan. If that's what you're looking to do, it might just extend your plan a little bit because you did have a lot of accomplishments in the last 5 years, which is great news.
Oh, Kathy, balance and just hit that button.
Accomplishments are good to record because you've got 5 areas that are looking at what other people are doing. And if you record it, somebody may say, oh, I could do it here or I could do it there. So it's really important. And it's important for people even moving into the county to see where things are in the process, because what's here may not be what you're used to, but you need to understand the continuum.
So do you have a preference on reverting to the previous pre-decision, or do you prefer to keep the list at the front and augment it, or leave the list as it is? What would be your sense?
If this becomes the new working plan, I would probably tend to keep it at the front so that if you're reading through, you can see what has been done, and then others who see it know where you've come from and where you're going to.
Cease.
Yeah, I'm one of the persons that kind of sort of asked to have the list reduced slightly. And the reason for that being is that it is great to have all the accomplishments listed, and I don't have a problem with putting them back. That doesn't bother me at all. But I'd also like to have them separated so that we got a current set. Now, a current can either be a year or 2 years, and then anything that happened prior to that. And it goes back to the question, what did you do for me lately? Because we may have a great history of what's been going on, but councils by their very nature change. And so a current council may not be as aggressive in accessibility as a previous council. So we got to make sure at the end of the day that we don't lose the momentum of being current on what we're doing. So if we wanted to put, say, for instance, a section at the front that says current, whatever that might be it a year, 2 years, it doesn't matter to me. And then underneath that, the accomplishments that have been done over a longer period of time, I'm fine with that. I just don't like them grouped together because it doesn't put pressure on the municipalities to continue the program of improving accessibility.
Yeah, I see where you're coming from, and I think that does bode well to the idea of having, as is there now, a separate section at the very beginning saying, here are the sorts of things that we do, and keeping them nice and separate, if I'm understanding you correctly, so that there is that sense of continuum, but we're not losing and not confusing what's going on with what's been accomplished. If I'm following you correctly, Cease.
That's close. I'm good with what you said.
Okay. Benin, how about you?
I was going to say that I agree with Cease that we need to find a balance between keeping our most recent accomplishments. There's nothing wrong with having what we've done so far in previous councils on a list, but we also need to make sure that there's a balance between, okay, here's what we're working on now, here's what we achieved then, because councils could be so different. Like comparing today's council to a previous one, maybe last year's council was a bit more ambitious than this one, I don't know, but I do think it's important to have a very varied mix, because we don't want people to think, well, the greatest thing they did was 5 years ago.
Yeah, absolutely. Is that does that give sufficient direction? You feeling good about that?
Can you summarize the direction? Are you able to do that? There was a lot.
Yeah. So the way I interpret it then would be that we don't want to make councils feel like we have been achieving things at such a rate that they don't need to engage. I mean, maybe it's best that you reiterate your backstory to your suggestion there. But am I gathering that we're okay with a list at the front in terms of just sheer direction? We're okay with keeping a list at the front.
Yes.
Yeah. Cease, you look as puzzled as maybe I'm feeling inside.
Well, I don't have a problem with what we're doing. It's all boils down to presentation and how it's going to look. But again, like I said, and I think Ben kind of sort of said the same thing I did, is that at the end of the day, you get a group of people and they rush and they complete like 20 items, and then all of a sudden then there's a void. To me, if you want to make this culture part of what we do, and maybe the opportunity does present itself to have 20 items because of the nature of the particular projects we're talking about. But I'd rather see a systematic approach to it, that every year so many things are done, and they're done year after year after year. Now, in some years, there may be slightly more than others because of circumstances, who knows? And also, again, to reflect the makeup of a particular council in a particular area. So that's kind of sort of, that's all I'm looking for is the ability to make the people who are signing off accountable for what they've done, and give kudos to those who came before by acknowledging them. But at the end of the day, the emphasis is not on what was done 10 years ago. It's what are we doing today and tomorrow.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yes, Andrea.
Can I suggest then, would the committee like to have the completed items that we removed from the last 5 years moved up into Sue's updated plan, where they're identified within the plan, those 5 years worth of accomplishments, and then you have your new fresh schedule that you're working on now attached to the plan, and then we can continue in that cycle every 5 years, if that's what you would like.
Does that sound amenable to everyone?
Yeah, I think that when the plan is being reviewed, and I don't know how often it is being reviewed, but let's assume for the sake of argument it's biannual. And so every 2 years it's being looked at. Then what would happen is we would look at the list of things that were in the completion and make a decision as to whether or not they're now part of the archive program as well, especially if we change councils. And then you haven't lost it. It's there. It's current. It's recognized. But at the same time, it's not a clutter of stuff that people cannot see what we're currently focusing on. And that's all I'm saying. I don't want to take away from giving people credit for what they've done and recognizing the amount of effort that took to get things done. But I also don't want to see, like, all of a sudden in Highlands East, in the last 5 years we've done 40 things, and now we're looking at 2024 and we got 0. That's not really good.
Yeah, I'm with you. So I guess that falls to what goes into our the work plan of each municipality going ahead, and it's up to Highlands East and Algonquin Highlands to make sure we've got some good works in the plan. Yes, please. Oh, Kathy and then
So what I read is these plans have to be created annually. And I also understood that there was legislation that said by the year 2025, certain things should be in place. And this is going back to 2001, 2005. Wouldn't it be nice as an end goal that there were no needs to put any more accessible things in the plan, like it's all done? So I don't know that I'm almost reading it's like a competition between the areas or something. There's lots of work to be done, and if it's on the list and it can be done easily, it should be done.
Mm-hmm. No, yeah, indeed. And I don't see it so much as a competition as just wanting to be sure that what has been done before, if it's an aggregate of 15 years worth of work, doesn't make what we're planning on doing this year look a little too cheap and cheerful, just by virtue of the fact that there has been a longer amount of time to build up that list than to work on the current list. But indeed, point very well taken, Andrea.
I was just going to let the committee know that in creating the attached document that identifies your local's goals for the next 5 years, or just this year right now, we have reached out, and the list that is here was provided by your staff.
Mm-hmm.
And then this is updated annually and brought back to you, usually this time of year, so that every year you can see what accomplishments are being done, or if you're seeing that there is something that's just sitting there idle, not happening, if you want to raise that.
Great. Any other points or thoughts on that? So what we might do is just circulate to those who weren't able to make it for all the logistical reasons today, just circulate like maybe a short turnaround deadline for any thoughts they have, and they can feed back in on on emails. And unless there is something that would change the decisions made today or the document, then I suppose they would be good to just to have and to integrate. But obviously, if there's a considerable change suggested, then we'd have to figure out the right process for bringing it back.
The clerk can correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe it was the hopes that the committee would approve the adjustments made, because I believe it needs to be passed by county council before the end of the year, or approved by county council by the end of the year. And we do only have one scheduled meeting with them.
So this is it, then we should be voting on this as the final. Yes, please.
So you're saying we vote on the whole plan. Is it possible to take a look at things like the transportation section and tease them out a little bit more? I know it's an additional item at the end, but they reference organizations and how people get around within this community. Is that something that should be teased out further in a plan like this?
Please.
As with any plan or document, it's fully within the committee's ability to adopt as presented today. There's some time constraints, but there's nothing that stops you from going back and revisiting the content of the plan during the year. So if the transportation is thing that you want to mind a little further down on, we have it identified. It's now identified within the plan as being an area of interest, an area of progression for the corporation, and then you can direct staff to look at it further and bring back a mid-year report or first quarter report as to how the particulars of that particular project, transit or whichever, could be advanced going forward. Similarly, I think to the point with respect to the listing of projects, is we can also work with our own staff, but also the staff of local municipalities, whereby on a regular reporting basis, even outside of the accessibility plan, when we're doing large CapEx projects or even administrative policy changes, things of that nature, it should be clear identifying how they're AODA compliant, what steps we're making to make sure that we're compliant in any of those endeavors. So you're not just getting a point in time reporting within this plan, you're getting a continuation of reporting every time something comes forward. So it's like rebuilding the cultures where being the accessibility parts becomes part of your corporate culture. And then that gets reported in your final plan. And I agree with Councillor Ryle about, and then it's broken down as the initiatives that were done as part of that work plan for that given period of time, be it by term of committee, but be it by the annual report of that. So you're really building a culture where it's not just look at the number of things we have on the list.
Yeah, that's great. So yes, indeed, not only can we revisit this, but it is within our mandate to continue to look at it and revisit it. And especially on transportation, that's been a really tough nut to crack for county council. It's a hard topic because of the diversity of where people live in our county and how folks are dispersed, and we've circled those wagons, no pun intended, a few times, and it's been a hard one to land. And I think the more that this committee can help keep that conversation going and keep reminding council that we need to keep working on it and cracking the nut, the better. Yes, Binin.
In regards to transportation, given how dispersed members of different counties are, if we were able to get transportation, would it be via bus pass or would it be via fees on the bus?
Well, that's the whole question. There have been a few attempts at there has been much effort put into creating studies to try to figure out which of those models would work best or could work best for the county. And it's been hard to drill down to one that is a do-all for all purposes that meets everyone's needs. And so so the results of those studies are still there, but right now council has put it on the back burner, with the exception of the RFP news that we're going to talk about in the next agenda item. So the short answer is we still don't know which of those models would be best, or a combination of the models, but they've all been considered and studied in their various ways over the years. Any comments for others who were part of that process? Yes, he's.
I was part of the initial task force that did this, I don't know, 5-6 years ago at least, maybe a little longer. And there was a lot of committed people from various aspects of the county, both geographically and in a need capacity, whether it's because they had a restriction in capability in some way, shape, or form, or they lived in an area that either could or could not be serviced by it. And at the end of the day, the county council of the day, because I was not sitting on county council at that time, basically made a decision that was just too expensive, and they just stopped the whole thing. It just came to an abrupt halt at that point. And it was Councillor Carter a couple of months ago who has brought it forward. So it's not that there wasn't work done in it. It's not that there were groups of people who were not ready to work and support it. It was just cost prohibitive in a way to make it feasible at that time. And I think the question that came forward, and I imagine we're going to be talking about it in the next session, is in a second look at it, can we make it more feasible? Can we make it more economically sound? And again, if not, where do we get the revenue to support it and the resources? So questions that have yet to be answered.
So are the sitting members of the committee comfortable with approving the document as we've reviewed it today? Yeah, could I have a mover with maybe with the amendments suggested, although they're tweaks, but can I have a mover and a seconder for that? Benin moving and Kathy second. That's great. All in favor? Wonderful. It's carried. Although it should, is there a substance in that resolution that you think we should read out, or is it fairly?
It's as written, so it's, I can read it out.
Okay, just in case.
That the Joint Accessibility Committee have acknowledged receipt of the draft 2023-2027 Joint Accessibility Plan, staff incorporated amendments as suggested by the committee. Once that Sue read out into the draft plan, and the draft plan be presented to County Council on December 13th.
Okay.
Gary needs to have his microphone on.
It all over again for everybody at home. So the resolution is acknowledgement of the receipt of the draft plan as submitted, as well as the incorporation of the amendments suggested to the committee today by Sue, and that the draft plan be presented to County Council, full County Council on December 13th for approval.
Yeah, we've already gotten everyone's favor. Anyone want to rescind their vote? No. Okay, we're good. Great. So next up is the new topic, the recently added topic. Hold on, I gotta get back into my computer again because it goes to sleep. Specifically regarding public transportation and the motion that was brought forward by Councillor Carter, seconded by Councillor Schell in, I believe, September. Lisa, do you want to speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, it was actually September 27th. I see you emailed to me, but I found it as well. And it was based, I'll just read the motion out for the members of the committee, and then we can talk after. It was, whereas the County of Haliburton supports the notion of public transportation, and whereas the population demographics of Haliburton County continue to trend older, and whereas the lack of public transportation is repeatedly identified as a hindrance to the growth of the community, and whereas reserve funds for transportation services are available for the 2023 budget, and whereas the closure of the Minden Emergency Department has increased the distances our constituents must travel to access medical care, be it resolved that Halliburton County issue an RFP for a 2-year bus transportation shuttle trial running between Minden and Halliburton. So that was on September 27th. So we really haven't seen anything come back yet. Obviously, it's too soon. About, to Ben's question of how it would work, what would it cost, that kind of thing. So we're not quite there yet, but the wheels are in motion, if you will.
And the really good part of this this idea is that we're not starting by trying to eat the entire elephant. Whereas before the previous studies, and Cease, you can confirm or correct, but before in previous attempts, we very much looked at how can we serve all of the county pretty much all at the same time, working with concentric circles perhaps, but basically what model might work for everybody. And this is a very short and sweet suggestion of what we can start with is transportation between our 2 major settlements, which is Halliburton Village and Minden, back and forth. Particularly more important now because of the medical facility being partly shut down in Minden, and people can't always afford the $75 it would take to get from one site to another. So let's start here, see if we can figure out a plan for that route and see how that informs our thinking about the rest of the county. So that's where we're at. Cease, I'll go to you first, just in case you want to make any corrections or clarifications, and then Ben, I see your hand after.
Yeah, the truth of the matter is, in that original program, at the end of it, one of the conclusions was that we do start with using both Minden and Halliburton as a starting point, but there was nothing in that initial plan. There was nothing looking at where we would be going after that. How long would the trial period last? How would we determine whether or not it could be expanded? And if so, how would that work? And because of that, at the council at that time, just after they've been working on it for 2 years, it's almost like, holding a baby for 8.5 months and then aborting the whole thing right towards the end. And I kind of felt a little bit out, even though as a member of Highlands East, we would have not got the original or the initial start of it. And we will not get the initial start of it this time either. But if we lay down the foundation, if we determine whether or not it is a feasible opportunity, then we can take the 2 units that we've been talking about, Halliburton and Minden. We can develop shoulda, coulda, woulda from them, because obviously we're going to find good things that work and maybe others not so much. And then modify the thing so it can be extended in some graphical area. That was the main piece that was missing, was how do we take the initial seed and grow it, and then at some point in time, where do we go? And what limits do we make it? What areas do we probably will never be able to service? And that's a real issue too, because it's just not possible to take a major cost, especially if you're paying for a bus and a driver to go to the middle of nowhere, and how to go about doing it. So in this phase, one of the things that I liked about the way it was presented and discussed when Bob brought it forward was that we're going to put together an RFQ, and we're going to look at the overall plan. The 2 communities that are going to be taking the full benefit from the beginning are going to be responsible for the operation of it, but we will share it as a county in developing it, and so that the RFQ, and I had no problem with it, will be shared amongst the 4 municipalities. But once we get to turning keys and running buses, then that would be the responsibility of those people who are going to use it. And that's the way I understood it to be. And I think that going forward, that is the right way to do it. But just because we hit a bump does not mean we should stop. We merely need to have a look at that bump, determine if anything we did caused it. If not, is there any way to get around it in terms of removing it altogether? Or is it something that we have to deal with and it will become part of what we do being in rural Ontario? And that's the piece I'm hoping will come out of this RFQ.
Great, thank you. Ben, did you want to add to that?
I wanted to ask if, because we may do this trial, And it may work, it might not. We'll see how it goes. But I'm wondering if there's also a way we can examine a way to lower the cost of transport for individuals who are using the bus systems. Because I think if the people that use the bus services are tending to skew towards the older demographic, I think $75 for a trip from Halliburton to Minden is a little bit ridiculous.
Yeah, indeed. And that's for the taxi service. That wouldn't be, I'm sure that would not be for the bus shuttle service at all.
That was the current cost, Ben, of what it is right now for taxi, just like Councillor Dayu has said. That's not what's being suggested.
Oh, okay. Well, I still think that could be lowered, because to me, that sounds a bit excessive.
I hear you. I think that's probably a decision of the taxi companies. But yeah. Kathy.
My question is, I picked this up in the foyer, benefits of public transportation in Halliburton County. And I, in my volunteer time, work at the food bank, and we're talking to people at the food bank. How are you getting here? You can't afford a car. You know, you're using a service in town, or you're using 5 services in the county. How do you get there? And they don't have, there doesn't appear to be a system to get people to get their groceries. So, and I'm also hearing that there's only one taxi service. There's no U-Ride or Uber or Lyft. And is that something that can be investigated? So at least maybe it's not $75 from Minden to Halliburton, $100 from Kinmount to Halliburton. Like, the one taxi service is making a lot of money. And they're licensed by the county, I believe.
Yeah.
So that needs to be thought about.
Lisa.
The previous director of tourism, Amanda Vertanen, absolutely investigated all of those venues and companies, and no go.
Do you recall why? Was it no interest on their part, or?
No interest, and the size of our community and just, numbers.
Yeah. And I think an on-call system was, like a custom built on-call system was available several years ago. Wasn't it like a ride share system of some kind, I think was available. But it was before my time here at the county, that's for sure.
Yeah, there was, and it was not, it wasn't used. People didn't take advantage of it enough to keep it running.
Yeah, it's a tough nut to crack, but we will crack it. Mr. CAO, do you have an update on where the RFP is?
Yeah, just by happenstance, I spoke with the staff this morning, and what we're looking to, because just the nature of the conversation today, there'll be a status report coming back to council at the next meeting. Just looking for some clarifications, some issues from a scope of work for their RFP, and there are some problems with releasing an RFP this close to like the Christmas season. It kind of gets lost in the mix, as we're looking at getting the RFP out just at the start of the new year, but we're going to come back to council, get some clarification on the original motion, and look at possibility, the options of creating options or expansions to the scope of work to talk about things that we talked about today about, is it just the one pilot? Or are we looking at doing some groundwork on other areas as well? So that'll come back to council in December.
So in terms of process, is now an appropriate moment to ask for some committee advice on things that might be included from an accessibility perspective into the RFP, or is that something that would normally be weeds that one would get into much later on in the process?
I think like anything, I mean, the committee can get their fingers into whatever they want whenever they want, right? In the standpoint of, if there's some like good ideas come from everywhere. So if the committee has some strong ideas of what should be considered under the scope of work or should be analyzed as part of the project, by all means, it can come out of today's meeting, it can come out of your next meeting. Today would be great if they're supposed to influence what we're doing for the RFP itself, as well as some implementation pieces going down the road. So
yeah, so I'm sure we'll see it coming back at the right moment. But does anyone have some initial thoughts on what they would really love to see from an accessibility standpoint in the RFP? I mean, the type of bus is an obvious, I suppose. Ben?
Yes, buses would be an obvious. I would also possibly a different a taxi service if possible. I've never seen one around here.
Uh-huh.
And I
There-
think we could have one that would accommodate wheelchairs of different designs, because mine is relatively large. So if you just have the one design that accommodates the standard manual chair, that's not going to work.
Okay, that's pretty important. Indeed. Yeah. And I'm sure that information has got to exist somewhere out there. There's got to be protocols for certain types of wheelchair sizes and ramps and things like that. So it's a question of finding that information, I guess.
Mhm.
Yeah. Yes, Kathy.
A lot of that information would be held in the school boards because the school boards bus kids all over the place and they would have to have accessible busing.
Right.
So the standards are there. I do understand the cost involved, but reality is if people can't get to services, that is not right. And so even if you worked, a suggestion would be to work with the school boards and use their buses during the day when they're not transporting kids. Partnerships.
Right, partnerships in that sense. It's interesting. Any other, yes, Sue, please.
I think Halliburton Bus Lines, they have they have accessible transportation through the school, as you've mentioned, and I think they also help where they can for different events. I don't know if that's how that works, if they must be hired by organizers. I just also wanted to add, I know that this is external from the county, but it might be important within this conversation, just that the Top Coach Lines has discontinued or will be discontinuing the Halliburton to Toronto line.
That's right.
And they've cited that's due to escalating costs. So I just wanted to add that as well, because I have seen different transportation models suggested throughout the years here that have included, an internal look at what transportation can look like, as well as for people to access services outside of the county, including medical and social services. So I just wanted to note that.
Yeah, no, that's really, really key and such a disappointment. Yeah. Other high level recommendations for the RFP? Yes, Cease.
Yeah, it's one, when we looked at this the last time, and again, this is a few years ago, they basically said that based on the model that they had then, and I'm sure there's documentation that will show how that was designed, you're looking at about an annual cost of about $500,000 a year. And I guess today you'd have to add a little bit to that. And that's kind of the way it is. But the way we finished that project, it broke two of the fundamental principles that I totally believe in. And the first principle is the impossible we handle right away. Miracles take a little longer. That doesn't
Sorry, would you
necessarily
repeat
mean
that?
we
I
give up.
didn't quite catch you. The first one is
The impossible we handle right away.
uh-huh.
Miracles take a little longer.
Hmm.
And I think the transportation group is in the category of a miracle. Now, that means that it's going to be hard going uphill, very, very steep. But at the end of the day, if we recognize that and we know that we're not going to get this done, if it doesn't get done in 24, 25, or even 26, does that mean we shouldn't pursue it? The answer to that is no. And the other adage that I believe in is 70% of something beats 100% of nothing. And whatever we come up with, and right now we're using both Minden and Halliburton as the model to start this whole thing with, which really doesn't do anything for Highlands East. And probably not much for Algonquin Highlands either, but it's a place to start.
Yeah.
It's a way we can look at the good, the bad, and the ugly and see how we can expand it if we do it right.
Yeah.
So I just want to make sure at the end of the day that we don't get so protected by the various areas that we live in that we don't see the advantage of the greater good. As long as when we come to put this thing on the road, that we recognize that those who are going to get the best benefit are probably going to pay the most for it.
Yeah.
When it comes to be operational.
Yeah. Great, thank you. So I think that might round up our original thinking on what might be included in the RFP. Yeah. Thanks for that. Any final thoughts on the public transportation piece before we don't have a motion or anything, that was for information. Any final thoughts on that? Yes, Kathy.
I just want to clarify, did I hear that the Canpar or the bus that comes up to Minden Halliburton is no longer going to be running
From Toronto, yeah.
from Toronto?
They put, what was that, 2 weeks ago, that announcement or so?
Yeah, I believe just recently, so within the last 2 weeks, but it's running until I think January or February maybe.
Yeah, wow. Huge disappointment. Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Absolutely. All right. We've got no further items on the agenda, so our next meeting date would be for this time next month. Does anyone have a number on when our next second council of the month is? Although it's December, isn't it? So that's probably been altered somewhat.
Yeah. I think you're probably looking at January unless there's really something that needs
That's
to be,
right.
and that would be the
That's right.
24th.
Yeah. Sorry, did you have a date there, Lisa? Did you say the 24th?
The 24th is our second meeting of the month in
Yeah.
January.
Yeah, I think that's probably what the plan is, unless there are objections to that. No.
Nope.
Yeah, I think taking December to be with our families is great. So good. So why don't we call it for the 24th of January? And that just leaves us with a motion to adjourn. If there's a mover and a seconder to adjourn. Ben? Any seconder? Anyone? Cease. All in favor? Excellent. Thank you very much. Short and sweet, but I think those are two really key pieces for us to keep our eye on. So thanks very much indeed. And have a good afternoon, plenty of power wherever you are.
All right.
Well done.